In this video we want to talk about the legal forms of business. Now it's a very straightforward video and quite a short one, only 37 slides, but it just really mentions the types of businesses that entrepreneurs may consider and what are the characteristics of those types of businesses. It's a type of discussion that appears quite often in the study of business and management. It crops up in various modules, so you may have encountered this elsewhere. Nonetheless, just to start, let's talk about legal forms of business, and we'll start with the proprietorship. It's a business owned by an individual, so one person owns the business and that person is the proprietor. Second, we have partnerships. This is an association of two or more persons acting as co-owners of a business. So a partnership has a minimum of two. It must have more than one, obviously, or otherwise I suppose it would be a proprietorship. So it has two or more persons who are co-owners of the business. And then we have a corporation, which is a legal entity separate from the individuals who own it. So a legal entity means that it can be sued and it can enter into contracts which are separate from the owner of the corporation. So the corporation has a legal standing, and that goes back to a court case called Solomon versus Solomon in the UK. We won't go through it here because it's dealt with in a law module. But let's start and look at proprietorships and just see what are the advantages and disadvantages of these. So we'll start with the advantages. First of all, it's very easy to create. A proprietorship just starts business, really. It just starts trading. There's no legal protection for the person conducting the business. They just have to be very careful, very honest, and just start trading and make sure they keep accurate records for taxation purposes and stay within the law. The owner, of course, keeps all of the profits. There's no sharing of profits between shareholders or sharing it with anyone else. The proprietor is the owner and gets to keep the profits. And of course, since there is only one person, that person makes all of the decisions. So the owner makes all of the decisions. There's no time wasted in consultation with colleagues or with managers or other employees. The owner makes the decisions. There is one person who conducts the business and makes the decisions. Now, the disadvantages of the proprietorship, well, it's an unlimited liability. So if for any reason the business is sued for perhaps faulty goods or goods which injure someone subsequently, or whatever, for whatever reason, they're, let's say, taken to court and damages are claimed off them, that's unlimited liability. That could involve the proprietor's personal wealth. It could mean that the proprietor loses his or her house or his or her assets. It's not just confined to the business. This means the proprietor, everything the proprietor owns is at risk. Of course, it's harder to obtain credit and capital because it's a small business run by one person. Banks and lending institutions tend to overlook this type of business and not really commit a lot of time or effort in looking at requests for support from small proprietorships. Now, partnership, well, the advantages of a partnership is it's easy to form. Very, very straightforward. A trip to a lawyer stroke solicitor should get it done very quickly. It just means having documents agreeing on who does what and who owns what and what their roles are. There is a direct share of profits. The partners tend to share the profits equally. So with two or more, if the business is working well and makes a profit, then the profits are shared equally. There can be a division of labour and management responsibility. So It's possible that the partners are there because they have certain expertise. One may be good at accountancy and the other may be good at whatever the product is that they're dealing in, or the service they're dealing in. It could be a partnership for a plumbing firm. So one of the partners may be an expert plumber and the other one could be very good at marketing and business and accounts and so on. So there may be a division of labour within the partnership. More capital would be available than in sole proprietorships because clearly there are more people involved, so they can bring in more capital. So partnerships tend to be bigger. There is less governmental control and regulation as compared to corporations. They tend to work and simply, providing that they pay their tax, their due tax, and meet the statutory regulations, they are left alone really to do their own thing, just continue their business. The disadvantages of partnership, well, unlimited liability for the firm's debts. If the firm does get into trouble for whatever reason, and let's say is taken to court to pay debts by debtors or so on, then the partner's own property and assets can be used and can be taken by the courts to pay off those debts. So it's unlimited liability. There is limited continuity of life of the enterprise because as the partners leave or perhaps suffer illness and drop out, then the enterprise will tend to fold. So it doesn't have continuity. I mean, we think of limited companies as going on for some of them for 100 years, maybe longer. Some go on for 200, 300 years. But with partnerships, when the partners leave, the partnership tends to fold up. It's difficult for them to get capital. It's difficult for partnerships to raise capital because, again, banks tend to be a little reticent about lending to partnerships. If they do lend, they want to know what the personal assets of the partners are and how secure the lending is. Generally speaking, it's quite difficult for them to find capital. Partners share responsibility for other partners' actions. So if one of the partners makes a mistake and causes a liability, then the other partner would be responsible for that as well. So there must be a lot of trust between them, a lot of understanding between the partners, because one partner can get another partner into problems. Now the corporation or the company, well, the advantages of this is that the owner's liability for the firm's debt is limited to their investment. So in other words, if the people who form the business each put in, let's say, £1,000, then that's the extent of their liability. If something goes wrong with the business, that's what they lose. They don't lose their personal property, they just lose what they've invested in the business. I say here it's ease of raising large amounts of capital. It's not ease, but it's certainly easier as compared to partnerships and proprietorships. Banks and lending institutions will more readily lend to companies than to the other two. It is possible to transfer ownership through the sale of stock, the sale of shares. It is possible to bring in new directors and old directors to retire and leave, and so it is possible to change the share register and make changes to it. So there tends to be a longer life to companies that are incorporated than, let's say, partnerships or proprietorships. The life of the enterprise is distinct from the owners. I was saying earlier that it's possible to, say, take legal action against the company, and that legal action is then limited to the action against the company, and that the The owners of the company, their private property and their assets are secure. They're not at risk. So the company can be seen as quite distinct from the individuals. And that, as I said, was a famous case in England called Solomon versus Solomon. Solomon the company and Solomon the person. And there were two distinct legal entities. That's the way the courts interpreted it. The disadvantages of corporations, well, extensive government regulation and activities. Government legislation tends to be aimed at companies. It could be health and safety regulations or fire regulations or training or diversity or whatever it is. It tends to come down on these companies, and they have to commit resources and ensure that they're abiding by the regulations as they come out. There can be high corporation fees because the legal firms can charge more to companies because they know they've got a better chance of being paid, and the companies will have more resources. But yeah, there's a higher corporation fees, not just legal fees, but companies tend to pay more just generally because the agents that deal with business tends to charge a little more for companies. Corporate capital, profits, dividends and salaries tend to be, well, they're double taxed in the sense that the company may pay tax on, let's say, on its profits, and then issue dividends to its shareholders, who then have to pay a private tax on top of that. So it's double taxed. If the company makes some profits, it has to pay a tax on its profits, corporation tax, if it falls into that category. But then it then subsequently issues dividends to its shareholders. The shareholders must then pay a tax because they've received that payment. So it's subject to double tax. Activities limited to those stated in the Charter. Well, I say the Charter. Companies tend to be governed by two documents: the Memorandum of Association and the Articles of Association. Whatever is written in there tends to be the constitution of the company, and that's the way the company is run, and that's the extent of the company. So anything which the directors of the company do, which is not allowed for in their Articles of Association, that would be ultra vires. That would be outside of the law. That would be not acceptable. So those are three forms of entities, legal business entities that entrepreneurs can consider when starting a business. Proprietorships, which would be the entrepreneur doing it him or herself. Partnerships, where let's say the entrepreneur gets together with some friends or business associates and forms a partnership, or forms a company as here. Now, this particular video is just a brief introduction to these. There are many other videos on the course that go somewhat deeper into the advantages and disadvantages of each of these. But for the moment, that should guide your thinking in terms of legal forms that may be followed, legal forms of business that may be followed by entrepreneurs. But that's all we're going to deal with here, so let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.